Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer. I am back from my absence, and thank you very much to everyone who looked after the podcast while I was away. Today, I'm joined by Terence Corrigan. Terence, thank you for coming on again this week.
Nicholas, good to have you back.
Very good to be back. And Gerbrandt van Heerden. Gerbrandt, how are you doing?
Good. It's a sunny, dry day in Potchefstroom.
It is a chilly, sunny day in Johannesburg, and I am rather jet-lagged because I've just come back from the United States, where I was trapped for a few days in the hell that is the US airline system. But I won't bore you with the details of that because it's just maddening. Anyway, let's talk about a little bit what's going on today. I don't think that there's a huge amount of news that hasn't already been covered this week, but there's still a couple of interesting stories. So yesterday we saw a scene that we've seen, I think, quite a few times in South Africa, but it's just an interesting case study to talk about this issue. And then this was in Pretoria, where there is an area close to the Bishop Tutu Refugee Reception Center. It's about 2.5 kilometers around that, which is dominated by many foreign nationals, mostly from Africa, who have gathered in this area. They all live together. They live in housing there, and they also have an informal market there. On Monday morning, a group of people calling themselves concerned citizens, numbering maybe around 100 or so, began smashing up and ransacking some of the foreign informal traders' shops in this area. They apparently took people's brooms, smashed them, destroyed people's stock, ruined various things. And this continued until, the police didn't show up to chase them away. In fact, local residents showed up and chased away these people, suggesting perhaps that they weren't anyone from the local community. Perhaps maybe they were rival informal traders or something like that. But regardless, this provoked quite an upset reaction from many of the foreigners. One of them would describe the event. He said, "Everyone took one stick there. We thought that they wanted to beat us. They first came to my table and opened it and threw the plastics away. They damaged a lot of things." Another informal trader said, "You people," they said to me, "you people, we don't want to see you here tomorrow. You must go back to your country because you are taking our jobs. I am not stealing from anyone. I'm not killing anyone. I just seated at my table. I didn't take anyone's occupation. It's not easy staying here. I wake up at 4:30 a.m. and I come here at 5 a.m. I'm not taking anyone's things. I'm not stealing. I'm just bringing my stock here to sell, and I pay for my stock." Another vendor said, "It's not easy. We want to send money back to our children to eat. That's why we come here. We feel bad because we want to go back to Zimbabwe, but everything is not well there. So what can we do? In Zimbabwe, there's no money for our children to go to school, to buy food for them. And this is why we are forced to come here. We can go back to Zimbabwe. We are free to go, but we want to survive." Terence, what do you make of this story? It's a story we've seen play out so many times across South Africa. I'm in that sort of position. I think that I can really see both sides of the argument. Obviously, vigilantism isn't okay, but I understand why there's so much frustration with such reduced resources. What do you make of this story?
Yeah, well, this is a bit like Groundhog Day. Happens every couple of months. That the foreigners are taking our jobs, and look, it's a symptom of a stressed society that where restricted opportunities are available, and also perhaps an element of cultural indigestion. It's very easy to focus on people who are trying to get by. My own understanding of it is that these informal traders do come with certain advantages, but that's not some sort of pathology on their side. It's the ability to add and subtract in their heads. I think it was a study about that in Johannesburg a couple of years ago. These are functions of functions of education systems, which while far from perfect, give them advantages that South Africans lack. Worldwide throughout history, there have been movements hostile to these kind of minorities occupying particular economic niches, but the invariable lesson seems to be that chasing them away causes more damage than gain. Think about Uganda, the expulsion of its Asian traders, something that is universally acknowledged now to have been, contributed to Uganda's breakdown. And President Museveni actually made some effort to try and encourage the descendants of these people to come back. Now we're talking about something on a very different scale. But I have heard stories about when we've had pogroms against foreign traders before. A couple of days later, people are walking around wondering where they can buy a cool drink. Well, you chased away the guys who were selling them, and now there's a problem.
I think bringing up the stress society thing, that really is the bottom line here, which is that we've got these sort of collapsed societies like in Zimbabwe next door, thanks in no small part to South Africa's diplomatic support for ZANU-PF. But also we've got the stress and the difficulties of the South African economy, the fact that resources are so constrained, the fact that unemployment is over 40%. Kerry, what do you make of this kind of story? It's an ongoing issue, and I think it's actually probably only going to become larger in our politics. Probably in a post-ANC world, this will become a major political issue as the political deck gets reshuffled. What do you make of this?
No, Nick, you're absolutely right. Xenophobic attacks and looting on foreign-owned shops, that has been occurring for the past few decades. But I think economically and socially, things in South Africa have become so dire that it's becoming more easy for people to, shift blame to a more vulnerable group. And secondly, you're starting to see political elites becoming more vocal about this topic, usually at the disadvantage of foreigners. You've seen Actionist jump onto this topic, and that's partially why they've grown to be so popular in Johannesburg. You've seen Malema, who, he, on the one hand, he would say, everyone in Africa, are brothers, and we must accept our African brothers and sisters in South Africa. But on the other hand, there was this situation where I think he visited some retail stores to kind of see what the percentage of foreigners, made up of, what percentage of their labor force were foreigners, essentially.
Restaurants.
Is it? Okay. And it's I think with our own CRA and IRR polling that we've done, we always, annually ask the question, what is the biggest issue that you're most concerned about, or one of the biggest issues that you're most concerned about in South Africa? And usually unemployment is number one. Crime and corruption is usually 2 or 3. But I think with our most recent polling, one issue that has really shot up out of the blue is immigrants and migrants. I think this is, as things are becoming more harder for the average South African, this issue is just becoming more prominent, and we're at a very scary moment, because that can easily, escalate into something bigger. But I would just add and say that the one narrative that we can use to kind of like counter this hostility to foreigners. Yes, foreigners come with their own issues. It's usually a double-edged sword, but usually the presence of foreigners have a net positive effect on a country. Some of the most successful societies in the world are immigrant countries. Look at the United States. When you go to London, it's very, very cosmopolitan. And some studies that were done by the IRR a few years ago showed that foreigners here in South Africa do benefit South Africans economically. A third of foreign-owned businesses employ South Africans, so they do create jobs for locals. They often have to buy products from other South African businesses. And because foreigners don't usually have like the right papers to get bank loans or home loans, they are forced to rent property from South Africans. So there is a net economic benefit to having foreigners in South Africa, but that narrative rarely reaches locals. But yeah, it's becoming a big issue in South Africa, and it's something that we have to watch closely in the next few years.
So there's a detail in the story here about how people in the local community came to the defense of the foreigners, and I'm not sure whether that meant that there was other foreigners who lived nearby who came to protect them from the vandals, or whether it was South Africans. But I think one of the problems with the way we talk about this issue, Terence, is that it's often set up as a kind of South Africans versus foreigners thing, where it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Some South Africans do actually support foreign businesses because they get credit from them at low interest rates, particularly from like Somali traders who, for religious reasons, don't really like high interest. The foreign shops often provide goods that people want or need at pretty good prices. And then you have other South Africans who maybe are in direct competition with hawkers or informal traders or whatever. And they're far more keen on this kind of action. Do you think it's worth kind of diving into those nuances a bit?
Well, I think that a couple of years ago, one of our ministers said something to the effect of, they must understand they're guests here and they will live in South Africa provided they share their secrets. Actually, there's no big secret. What these communities often have is a high degree of internal trust. This is also not unique to South Africa. The Italians in America in the 19th century did the same thing. I mean, that was why Bank of America started out as Bank of Italy. And it's often forgotten. Italian immigrants were very close to the bottom of the heap socially at that time. Catholic didn't speak great English, often associated with crime, and very much like the Irish. Somalis often come here, same sort of dynamics, but they know that if they pull together, they can buy in bulk. There's nothing intrinsically that stops South Africans from doing that. There's also, I think, the idea that foreigners who come here hoping to make a go of it are willing to accept a lot less for, certainly for a number of years. It was case in northern KZN, Newcastle, where Chinese and Taiwanese businesses were coming in for a lot of flack, and the idea they were exploiting the local community, until someone went in and discovered that this family from Guangzhou were literally living in the warehouse. They were saving every cent they could. Now, you could argue that locals shouldn't have to compete with that because we want people to have a good standard of living. But that also means corresponding, let me call it, inefficiencies for the local consumer. my own sense is that in order to deal with any problem, you have to understand it properly. And my own, my own view is that sometimes it's really worth looking at what we locals are not doing. And maybe it's easy for me to say because I had certain advantages and I've got a university degree and whatever, and I'm not competing in a spaza shop. But yeah, really until we're able to get some sort of significant economic expansion going, these the perception of restricted opportunities is going to be a real one and a very combustible one. And yes, you are quite correct. I think that the idea that South Africans versus foreigners is a simplistic way of looking at things. Look, just one sort of final point there. I remember, growing up in a mining community in northern KZN during the 70s and 80s. Now, obviously, very different society, strictly segregated and everything, but there's often a kind of snootiness, about immigrants, generally speaking, about working class British people coming to South Africa. Or the Greeks who owned cafes. Well, these were often people coming with skills, willing to uproot from their social networks, particularly the more entrepreneurials. And I'm thinking here the Greek cafes is these guys have often branched out into supermarkets, and that's not a degree a sense of entrepreneurship that I think we should celebrate rather than reviling.
Definitely something to keep in mind. All right. We've talked a lot about this week about the National Health Insurance Scheme, which has been quickly pushed through Parliament. When I went away to the US, I saw load shedding was reduced. And so I thought maybe I was just a bad luck charm for South Africa. But then while I was away, NHI gets rammed through Parliament. So maybe I'm not such bad luck after all. And the IRR, which we all work for, has long criticized the NHI for many reasons, some of which I believe already been discussed on the show this week. But interestingly, the criticism for NHI is not simply on our side of the political spectrum. Indeed, interestingly enough, the EFF has decided to come out and attacking it, despite some of their obvious ideological sympathies for the NHI's approach. Malema, in an interview, said, I believe this was for the Sunday Times podcast, "My biggest concern with the NHI is you have to go to a health facility that is close to you to be a beneficiary of such a policy. But we know most people have no such facilities next to them. And if they are not in a better condition." Malema, however, dismissed any concerns about funding the NHI, simply saying, where there is a political will, there will always be a political way to finance the bill. Whether it's a political will, we have passed the first lake. It may not be as perfect as we want it to be, but once you pass that first lake, we will find the money through the state to finance this important policy that will address primary healthcare. The EFF, in a statement when NHI went through Parliament, called it, quote, "a catastrophic development in the midst of the ongoing collapse of the public health sector. The NHI in rhetoric sets out to right the wrongs of inequality, access to healthcare, delivering universal healthcare coverage, while in essence it is far from those aspirations." On countless occasions, the EFF has highlighted the problematic clauses within the bill and its fundamental position on the developing of a national funding pool. This is precisely because the health system of our country does not need a national student financial aid scheme style funding system to resolve the crisis of debilitating healthcare that plagues our country. They go on to complain that by leaving a profit incentive in the system for some private healthcare providers, presumably by still having the existence of private healthcare providers, that this will create perverse outcomes. Terence, let me start with you again. You talked on NHI already this week, but your thoughts on this? I mean, it's a little bit odd, I think, to see the EFF coming out against this, considering that I could very easily see an EFF government producing a very similar piece of legislation, maybe one just a little bit more radical. What do you make of this?
Yeah, look, I think that the EFF as a party thrives off confrontation. So I don't imagine the EFF would as a matter of principle want to come out and support anything that it couldn't take direct direct credit for. Also, it's changing slightly now, but it's so since its founding been overwhelmingly an opposition party. Those who've criticized the DA or the Freedom Front Plus or whatever for not showing alternatives, which I don't think is entirely accurate, might want to bear in mind that the EFF has put that onto steroids. Pardon the pun in the context. But yeah, so in a sense, obviously, it's going to do this. It's not going to be good enough or radical enough for it. I would just, just a bit of shameless self-promotion. Please look at my forthcoming column on Monday, where I talk about how this is likely to unfold. I think that one could make a decent argument or a respectable argument, not one I personally agree with, that something like health or education should not be governed by a profit motive, the question of social solidarity and whatever. Now, I don't personally believe that this is productive, but as I say, it's an honourable case to be made. The question, the point is that as the phrase goes, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. And I think that no matter how much profit motive you try to extract and how much you bang the social solidarity drum, we are working with the state we have, and the ability to manipulate political influence into some sort of pecuniary gain is one thing at which our political caste, particularly represented by the current ruling party, is very adept at. This is also not something that is unique to South Africa. Control systems around the world have invariably lend themselves to one rule for thee, another rule for me. That's why someone like Julius Nyerere, the ardent socialist conscience of Africa, could die in a private clinic in London, receiving treatment which I imagine is very difficult at any price in Tanzania.
Indeed. Kerry, what's your take on this? My thinking is perhaps that the EFF maybe on one level realizes that NHI is going to be a disaster and wants to get out ahead and say, well, we never supported this, so you can't blame us for it. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, they might be thinking ahead of, what this would mean for them if the NHI turns out to be a disaster. I think the fact that you have a political party that obviously advocates for nationalization as part of their core policy documents, going against, well, not going against, but criticizing the NHI in its current form, it just shows how impractical it is at the moment, and how there hasn't been much planning done with how to effectively implement the system. Nobody knows really how much this will cost, but we do know this is going to be one of the most expensive endeavors that South Africa will ever undertake. And also and I've mentioned this before, the former health ombudsman, he visited every province in the country to see what their health establishments look like and their health facilities look like. And even though he was very in favor of the NHI being implemented, he said that the overall majority of the state's public health facilities will not be ready to implement the NHI. So there's just it's just a way for the government to try and score a goal before the 2024 elections. I think they know that it can't be implemented in its current form, but they just need to pass that goalpost before the elections. It's kind of like how we spoke about the police delegation that went to China a few weeks ago to kind of talk about how to improve policing matters. We don't have to visit another country to see how we can improve our own police policing or health institutions? The answers are very simple. Root out corruption, employ skilled staff, remove barriers that prevent us from employing skilled staff, better allocation of resources and funds. But once again, with so many things the ANC does, they don't want to implement the simple solutions, because it will hurt their own political motives. And instead, we go for this grand major plans such as the NHI and land reform, expropriation without compensation, as kind of like quick fixes to problems, and also very, very populist in nature, so that they can kind of like, keep above the 50% at the election. But yeah, it's quite a thing that the EFF is now criticizing the NHI. But yeah, what I would love to see, though, is more criticism from private healthcare institutions and from
Yes.
business come out a little bit more against it. Yeah.
Yeah, let me
Indeed.
just piggyback on what Harry said there. That we've for this to be implemented, if it's done incrementally, which is the only way it could possibly be implemented successfully, I think step by step it would show up its weaknesses. However, it would be reversible. Only so much damage can be done with each step. Now, when this plan was first mooted about 15 years ago, there was a suggestion, which I think was backed by the then Director General of Health. I was a bit hazy in my mind, that this must be done as one big bang. Now, what is that? Now, how would that be different? Well, if everything has changed at once, it's a lot more difficult to roll back, and then you've sort of you've got the systems, you've got the resources in your hands. And my sense is that that's probably what the EFF would want, and it would want to be it would want to be in charge of this. At the risk of sounding like a McCarthyite, but sometimes even McCarthy was right. Lenin said something about the need to crush czarist counter-resistance. So you had to move decisively against your opponents, and I think that's very much the way that the EFF would like to bring this in. And I'll also maintain the following: in order to understand this, you've got to formulate it properly. The NHI will be a new state-owned enterprise whose sole function is to collect and spend money. Nothing else. This isn't necessarily about what happens to your private hospital, or it's about the money. Understand that, and you can see where it's going. This is kind of like Eskom without the power stations. Just the ability to spend the money. Close to 9% of GDP. Almost 1 in every 10 rands going through the economy. That is a lot of Tom. And if you can't see the problem there, you haven't been paying attention.
And you're going to suddenly see the fight over who gets to be the health minister, I think, intensify quite a lot. Because when you're dealing with that kind of money, the temptations to perhaps, if you're a senior ANC politician, to maybe dip your hand into that a little bit here or there. It's not.
Don't be so cynical, Mauro.
Me cynical never. Okay, we don't really have time for another story, so thank you very much, everyone, for listening today. We hope that you found the show interesting. I will be back hosting it for the foreseeable future. We are going to be continuing with our Daily Friend Wrap, which is the shorter version of the show that we've debuted an episode on the channel. There will be more of those going forward, so keep an eye out for those. And with that, I hope that you all have a wonderful and excellent day. Cheers, everyone.